The knock on my door came at 3 a.m. It was not gentle or hesitant, it was loud, almost violent, shaking me out of a restless sleep. My first thought was, police. Stumbling to the door in my boxers, I squinted through the peephole, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, on the porch, stood Connie, my wife's younger sister, drenched from head to toe in what looked like rain, mascara streaking down her face, clutching a crumpled letter. I need to come in, she stammered, her voice cracking as if she had been crying for hours. What the hell's going on? I asked, letting her inside and immediately grabbing a towel from the couch. The sight of her in that state was unsettling. Connie was the confident one, the one who never let anyone see her break. Now, she looked like she was seconds away from collapsing. "It's Veronica," she began, her hands trembling as she handed me the soaked letter. She's gone." For a moment, I thought she meant gone, as in dead, but when I opened the letter and read the first line, my stomach dropped. The letter, wrinkled and water-stained, felt heavy in my hands. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. "Dear Tom, by the time you read this, I will have made my decision. Please do not try to find me. This is not your fault. I cannot live this life anymore." My eyes darted over the rest of the note, skipping half the sentences. Words like freedom, sorry, and goodbye screamed out at me. What the hell is this? I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. Connie flinched. "I do not know where she is, Tom," she said, her voice breaking. "She told me she was going on a trip to clear her head. That was 3 days ago. Now this." She gestured to the note. "I thought maybe she came back to you." "No, she did not come back to me," I barked, slamming the letter on the coffee table. My chest tightened as the weight of what she was saying sank in. Wait, 3 days ago. And you are just now telling me? I thought she would come back on her own. Veronica has always been dramatic, but she has never done something like this." Connie collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I stared at Connie, my mind racing through every interaction I had with Veronica over the last month. The late-night texts she was so protective of. The new clothes she bought but never wore around me. And that damned work trip she claimed was mandatory. It all started clicking together like a cruel puzzle I never wanted to solve. "This does not make sense," I muttered, pacing the living room. "She left without a word, and now you're bringing me this suicide note? Did you check her phone? Did you call anyone? The police?" "I called the police yesterday," Connie replied, her voice flat. "They said she's an adult, and unless there's evidence she's in danger, they cannot do much. I even went to her office. That's when I found out." Her voice wavered. "Found out what?" I stopped pacing and turned to her. She was holding something back. She hesitated, her lip trembling. "She was not on a work trip, Tom. Veronica took a week off, vacation days. One of her coworkers let it slip. She said Veronica left town, with someone." My stomach twisted. "Someone? Who?" Connie shook her head. "I do not know. They would not tell me. But from the way they looked at me, I think it was a man." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I thought maybe you knew something, if she was unhappy or..." "Unhappy?" I exploded, the word cutting through the air like a knife. "We were fine, Connie. At least, I thought we were. I had no idea she was planning, whatever the hell this is." My voice cracked as I pointed at the letter. Connie recoiled slightly but stood her ground. "I am just as shocked as you are, Tom. But sitting here screaming at me will not fix this. What are we going to do?" Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. What were we going to do? My wife was missing. She might have run off with some other guy, or worse, she might have been telling the truth in that damned letter. I slumped into the chair across from Connie, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The questions swirled in my head like a storm. Who was this other man? Where had they gone? And why the hell would she leave me to pick up the pieces of her mess? I need a drink, I muttered, pushing myself to my feet. Connie said nothing as I rummaged through the cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey. I poured a glass, downing it in one go before refilling. You should slow down, Connie said softly, her voice cautious. Do not tell me to slow down, I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. You just dropped a damn bombshell in my lap, Connie. I think I've earned a drink. She sighed, leaning back against the couch. I get it, okay. I am not here to fight with you. I am here because I thought you deserved to know the truth. Whatever that truth is. I glared at her, the words cutting into me. And what if the truth is that my wife, your sister, was just a selfish coward who ran off with some guy and left us to deal with the fallout? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to snap back. But instead, she took a deep breath, calming herself. If that is the truth, then you need to hear it. We both do. I shook my head, staring into my glass. The silence between us stretched, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Did you tell anyone else? I finally asked. Your parents? Her friends? She shook her head. No. I thought we should figure out what to do first. If we go to them with this, it'll destroy them. I nodded, rubbing my temples. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. Veronica's parents adored her. Telling them their daughter had disappeared under these circumstances would only make things worse. We'll start with the police, I said. But this time, I am going with you. If they think they can brush this off, they are dead wrong. Connie nodded, relief flashing in her eyes. Okay. Let's do it tomorrow. First thing. The next morning, Connie and I walked into the police station, the weight of the situation settling heavier with each step. The desk sergeant looked up as we approached, her face neutral but bored. How can I help you? She asked, her pen poised over a clipboard. My wife is missing, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I need to speak to someone who will take this seriously. The sergeant raised an eyebrow but picked up the phone, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. A few moments later, a detective stepped out from a side office. He was tall, with a wiry frame and a thin mustache that twitched when he spoke. Mr. Lynch, he said, glancing between me and Connie. I'm Detective Barnes. Let's step into my office. We followed him down a narrow hallway to a small, cluttered room. He gestured for us to sit, then leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the desk. So, he began, tell me what's going on. I launched into the story, starting with the letter Connie had brought me and ending with the suspicious details she uncovered at Veronica's office. Barnes listened intently, his face giving nothing away. Do you have the letter with you? He asked when I finished. I pulled it from my jacket pocket, unfolding it carefully. He took it, scanning the page before setting it down. Have you checked with her credit card company or bank accounts? He asked. Any unusual activity? No, I admitted. I thought the police could help with that. We can, but it takes time, Barnes replied. I will also need her phone number and any recent photos you have. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the last picture I had of Veronica. It was from a barbecue a few weeks ago. She was smiling, holding a glass of wine, her hair falling over her shoulder like she did not have a care in the world. Here, I said, handing him the phone. This is the most recent one. He nodded, noting the details. We will run a trace on her phone and start contacting hotels or rental agencies in the area. If she booked anything under her name, we will find it. And what if she used someone else's name? Connie asked, her voice sharp. Barnes gave her a measured look. Then it gets more complicated. But we will start with what we have. That's it? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. You are not going to send anyone out to look for her. Mr. Lynch, Barnes said calmly, your wife left a note saying she was leaving. There's no evidence of foul play. As far as the law is concerned, she left of her own free will. Until we find something to suggest otherwise, there is only so much we can do. I clenched my fists, anger boiling in my chest, but Connie put a hand on my arm, stopping me. Let's just give them time, she said softly. Time. It felt like the one thing I did not have. By the time we left the station, my frustration had reached a boiling point. Connie and I walked back to the car in silence, the tension between us thick. Once we were inside, I slammed my hands against the steering wheel. She's my wife, Connie. I spat, the words tumbling out like venom. And they are acting like this is some kind of goddamn misunderstanding. Connie stayed quiet for a moment, staring out the window. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice calm but laced with something heavier. Tom, what if she does not want to be found? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to her, my voice low and tight. What the hell are you saying? She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I mean, if she really did run off with someone else. If she left that letter for you because she knew this would hurt. What if she chose this? Chose this? I echoed, incredulous. You think she chose to abandon her family? To humiliate me? What kind of person does that? Connie looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not know. But it does not sound like the Veronica I grew up with. I exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Part of me hated Connie for even suggesting it, but deep down, a small, painful voice whispered that she might be right. As we pulled out of the lot, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I snatched it up, seeing a number I did not recognize. Without thinking, I answered. Hello. Mr. Lynch, a male voice asked. This is Detective Barnes. I wanted to give you a quick update. My pulse quickened. Did you find something? Not exactly, he said, his tone cautious. But I just got off the phone with one of your wife's coworkers. They confirmed she was seen leaving the office with a man last week. A senior accountant. His name is Brandon Collins. The name meant nothing to me, but my grip on the phone tightened. Who the hell is Brandon Collins? That is what we are going to find out, Barnes said. I'll keep you posted if anything else comes up. The call ended, leaving me staring blankly at the screen. Brandon Collins, I muttered under my breath. Who is that? Connie asked, her brow furrowed. I do not know, I said, the words tasting bitter. But I am damn well going to find out. By the time we got back to my house, my head was spinning. I could not stop thinking about the name, Brandon Collins. Who was he? How did he fit into all of this? And, most importantly, what was he doing with my wife? Connie trailed behind me as I stepped inside, the silence between us heavy. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Do you think this Collins guy has something to do with her leaving? Connie asked, breaking the silence. I do not think, I snapped. I know he does. Why else would she be with him? Connie flinched at my tone but did not argue. She sat across from me, her hands folded on the table. So, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? I repeated, laughing bitterly. I am going to find him, Connie. And when I do, I am going to get some goddamn answers. How? She asked, her voice careful. I stared at her, the gears in my head turning. I knew where Veronica worked. If this guy was her coworker, there had to be something I could find, an email, a photo, anything. I need to check her laptop, I said, pushing back from the table. What? Tom, you cannot. I can, and I will, I cut her off. If she left me to deal with this mess, the least she owes me is some answers. Connie did not stop me as I stormed up to the bedroom. The laptop was on the desk, just where she always left it. I opened it, the familiar password screen greeting me. For a moment, my heart sank. But then, as if on autopilot, my fingers typed, Veronica 1968. The screen unlocked, and I let out a shaky breath. The desktop was neat, almost too neat. I clicked through her folders, searching for anything that might give me a clue. Finally, in a folder labeled Work Docs, I found an email draft that stopped me cold. Brandon, I cannot keep doing this. The guilt is eating me alive. I care about you, but I cannot destroy my family. Please, do not contact me again. The draft was dated 2 weeks ago. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen. She had been having an affair. There was no other explanation. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, had been sneaking around behind my back. Tom. Connie's voice came from the doorway, hesitant. I turned to her, my face blank. She was cheating on me, I said, the words hollow. What? Connie stepped closer, her eyes wide. I pointed to the screen, letting her read it for herself. Her hand flew to her mouth as she finished, her face a mixture of shock and anger. I cannot believe this, she whispered. How could she? I do not know, I said, slamming the laptop shut. But I am going to find Brandon Collins, and I am going to get the truth. Tracking down Brandon Collins was not as difficult as I thought it would be. A quick search of Veronica's email revealed his full name, and LinkedIn did the rest. His profile picture stared back at me, a clean-cut guy in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, a smug smile, and a title, Senior Accountant at Reynolds Financial Group. I stared at his face, the rage in my chest bubbling up like lava. This was the man who had ruined my life. I saved his profile and turned to Connie, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room. Found him, I said flatly, pointing at the screen. She walked over, leaning in to get a look. Her lips pressed into a thin line. What are you going to do now? I am going to talk to him, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, I felt like a grenade with the pin pulled. He owes me answers. Tom, this is not a good idea, she said, her tone cautious. What if he denies everything? Or worse, what if he calls the police? I do not care, I snapped, slamming the laptop shut. I need to hear it from him. That evening, I sat in my car outside Brandon Collins's house. It was a modest 2-story place in a quiet suburb, the kind of neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the steering wheel, watching the lights flicker on in the living room. Are you sure about this? Connie's voice came through the phone, breaking the silence. I am not sure about anything anymore, I admitted. But I have to do this. Be careful, she said softly. I hung up, pocketing my phone and stepping out of the car. My heart pounded as I approached the front door, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I rang the doorbell, the sound seemed to echo louder than it should have. After a moment, the door opened, and there he was, Brandon Collins in the flesh. He looked just like his picture, only now there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes as he stared at me. Can I help you? He asked, his voice polite but cautious. You are Brandon Collins? I asked, my voice tight. Yes, he said slowly. Who are you? I am Tom Lynch. Veronica's husband, I said, spitting the words out like venom. His face paled instantly. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. That was all the confirmation I needed. You son of a bitch, I growled, stepping closer. You think you can just waltz into my life, destroy my marriage, and walk away? Listen, he he started, but I cut him off. Do not listen to me. I barked. You knew she was married. You knew she had a family, and you still, my voice cracked, and I stepped back, trying to keep control of myself. You still took her from us. I did not take her, he said, his voice low. She made her own choices. His words hit me like a slap in the face. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a moment, I wanted to hit him. But instead, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Where is she? I asked through gritted teeth. Brandon hesitated, his eyes darting away. I do not know, he said finally. She ended things 2 weeks ago. Said she could not keep living like this. I have not heard from her since. You expect me to believe that? I asked, my voice shaking. It is the truth, he said, meeting my eyes. I swear to God, Tom, I do not know where she is. I stood there on Brandon Collins's doorstep, the tension between us as thick as a storm cloud. His words rang in my ears, but I could not bring myself to trust him. Every fiber of my being told me there was more to the story, there had to be. If you're lying to me, I said, my voice trembling with restrained fury, I will find out. And when I do, you'll wish you'd never met her. Brandon held up his hands defensively. I'm not lying. Look, man, I never wanted this to happen. Veronica, she was in a bad place. She said you were distant, that she felt trapped. I was there. You were there. I echoed, my voice rising. Do you have any idea what you've done to my family? My kids? You don't just be there for a married woman, you piece of. The door behind him suddenly creaked open, and a woman stepped into view. She was younger, blonde, and visibly pregnant. Her wide eyes darted between Brandon and me, and I could see the panic setting in. Brandon, she said softly, her voice trembling. What's going on? I froze. The sight of her caught me off guard. For a moment, I could not breathe. Brandon turned to her, his expression a mix of guilt and frustration. Go back inside, Lisa, he said quickly. Who is this? She asked, her voice growing firmer. What is he talking about? I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Unbelievable. You've got a whole family here, do you? And yet you had no problem wrecking mine. Tom, stop, Brandon pleaded, stepping between me and Lisa. You've said what you needed to say. Just go. I'm not going anywhere until I get the truth, I snapped, stepping closer. You think you can play house here while my wife is God knows where? Not happening. Lisa's face twisted in confusion, then anger. What is he talking about, Brandon? Who's Veronica? Nobody, Brandon said quickly, but the damage was already done. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she took a step back. Is this why you've been so distant? She asked, her voice trembling. Is there someone else? Lisa, it's not like that, Brandon said, his voice cracking. I swear. Save it, I cut in, my voice cold. You two deserve each other. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car, leaving Brandon to clean up the mess I had just dropped on his doorstep. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. Back home, Connie was waiting for me, her face pale with worry. What happened? She asked the moment I walked through the door. I dropped my keys on the counter and sank into a chair, running a hand through my hair. He says he hasn't seen her in weeks. Claims she ended it. But guess what? He's got a pregnant fiancée waiting for him at home. Connie's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Dead serious, I said, shaking my head. The guy's a walking cliché. And Veronica. I don't even know what to think anymore. Connie sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine. What do we do now? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not giving up. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of dread. Connie was already in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her expression wary. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "No," I muttered, grabbing a mug and filling it. The confrontation with Brandon replayed in my mind on an endless loop. Every time I thought about him, my blood boiled. But what haunted me more was Veronica. Where was she? And why the hell had she chosen this path? Connie slid a folder across the counter. "I thought you might want to see this." I opened it hesitantly. Inside were printed screenshots, credit card statements, and receipts. My heart sank as I realized what I was looking at, a trail of transactions linked to Veronica's accounts. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice a mix of suspicion and gratitude. "I stayed up last night looking into her accounts," Connie admitted. "I know a guy who works in finance. He owed me a favor. Turns out, Veronica made a few charges before she disappeared." I flipped through the papers, my eyes scanning the dates and amounts. A hotel booking in a nearby city. A purchase at a high-end boutique. And then, something that made my stomach turn, a one-way plane ticket to a tropical destination. "She flew to the Bahamas?" I asked, incredulous. Connie nodded. "It looks like it. The flight was booked 2 days before she disappeared." I stared at the paper, my chest tightening. She left me. She really left me. Connie reached out, placing a hand on mine. "Tom, we don't know that for sure. Maybe she just needed time. Maybe she thought you'd find the note and understand." "Understand what?" I snapped, pulling my hand away. "That she was done with me. That she ran off to some paradise while I was left here picking up the pieces." "No, Connie. I don't understand. And I never will." The idea of Veronica lounging on a beach while I drowned in her chaos was unbearable. I had to do something. Anything. By the end of the day, I had decided, I was going to the Bahamas. I needed to know if she was still there, if she was even alive. And if I found her, I needed to hear it from her. I needed closure. Connie insisted on coming with me. At first, I argued, but deep down, I was relieved. The thought of facing this alone was too much. 2 days later, we were on a plane, the tension between us palpable. Connie tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about the tiny seats and terrible airplane food, but I barely responded. My mind was elsewhere, imagining all the ways this trip could end. When we landed, the warm air hit me like a wall. The sun was blinding, the island bustling with tourists. It was surreal to think that somewhere among all this beauty, Veronica might be hiding. We started at the hotel listed on the receipt. The clerk at the front desk gave us a polite smile but shook her head when I showed her Veronica's picture. "I'm sorry," she said. "That guest checked out a week ago." My stomach dropped. Did she leave any forwarding information? A new hotel? Anything? The clerk hesitated. "I'm afraid I can't give out personal information, sir." "Please," I said, my voice cracking. "She's my wife. She's missing. I just need to know she's okay." The woman's expression softened. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. She mentioned a resort on the other side of the island. Something exclusive. That's all I know. The drive to the resort was agonizingly slow. The narrow, winding roads were packed with tourists in rental cars and locals on scooters. Connie sat beside me, clutching the map we had picked up at the airport. She kept glancing at me, her lips pressed tightly together, but she said nothing. "Just say it," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the road. "Say what?" she asked. "Whatever it is you're holding back," I said. "I can see it all over your face." She hesitated, then sighed. "Tom, what if you don't find what you're looking for? What if she's gone? Or worse, what if you do find her, and it's not the answer you want? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. I have to know, Connie. I can't keep living like this. Not knowing is worse than anything she could say to me. She nodded, her gaze dropping to her lap. I get it. I don't want you to get hurt. It is a little late for that, I said bitterly. The resort was everything I imagined, luxurious, exclusive, and painfully out of reach for someone like me. The kind of place where the staff wore pristine white uniforms and the guests sipped cocktails by the pool at noon. Connie and I stepped into the lobby, the cool air conditioning a sharp contrast to the heat outside. The woman at the front desk greeted us with a bright, professional smile. Welcome to the Emerald Reef. How may I assist you? I pulled out my phone, showing her the last picture I had of Veronica. I'm looking for my wife. She might have been staying here. Her name is Veronica Lynch. The woman's smile faltered for a split second, so brief I almost missed it. I'm sorry, sir, she said. I can't give out information about our guests. Please, I said, my voice thick with desperation. I think she's in trouble. If she's here, I just need to talk to her. The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at a man in a suit who was clearly her supervisor. He nodded subtly, and she leaned in closer. Room 304, she whispered. But I didn't tell you that. Connie and I practically ran to the elevator. My heart pounded as we rode up to the third floor, the numbers ticking by like a countdown to disaster. When we reached the door to room 304, I froze. My hand hovered over the door, my breath shallow. Do you want me to knock? Connie asked gently. I shook my head and forced myself to move. I knocked 3 times, my fist hitting the wood harder than I intended. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the door creaked open. Veronica stood there, barefoot and wrapped in a silk robe. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes widened when she saw me. For a second, we just stared at each other, the silence suffocating. Tom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. This is where you've been? Living it up in paradise while I've been losing my mind? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a man's voice called from inside the room. Who's at the door, babe? Everything inside me went cold. A tall, tan man with a chiseled jaw appeared behind her, his shirt unbuttoned. He looked between me and Veronica, confusion etched on his face. Who the hell is this? I demanded, my voice a roar. The man frowned. I should ask you the same thing. I'm her husband, I spat, taking a step forward. Veronica's face turned pale. Tom, please, just save it, I snapped, cutting her off. I didn't come here for excuses. I came for the truth. So start talking. The tension in the room was suffocating. The man, this stranger, stepped forward, his brow furrowed as he glanced between Veronica and me. Husband, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. You said you were separated. Separated? I barked, my voice echoing off the walls. We're not separated. She disappeared. Left a goddamn note and vanished. That's not separation, that's abandonment. Veronica's eyes filled with tears as she raised her hands, palms out, as if trying to calm me down. Tom, please, let me explain. Explain. I laughed bitterly. Oh, this should be good. Go on, Veronica. Explain why you're here, with him, while I've been tearing my life apart trying to find you. She hesitated, her gaze darting to the man behind her. He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Maybe you should leave, he said, his voice low. This isn't the time for this. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. I don't remember asking for your opinion, buddy. Tom, stop. Veronica shouted, her voice cracking. This isn't his fault. This is on me. I turned back to her, my chest heaving. Then start talking, Veronica. Because I swear to God, if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'll... What? She snapped, cutting me off. What will you do, Tom? Drag me back home? Force me to live a lie again? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. A lie? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. I couldn't do it anymore, Tom. Pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I was suffocating. I shook my head, disbelief flooding me. Suffocating? In what? Our marriage? Our family? Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. Yes. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't stay. Not like that. And him? I said, jerking my thumb toward the man. What's his role in all of this? He. She hesitated, biting her lip. He made me feel alive again. I felt the world tilt, like the ground was giving way beneath my feet. Alive? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. While I was at home, raising our kids, working my ass off, trying to keep our life together, you were here, playing house with this guy. Veronica looked down, her silence saying more than words ever could. Unbelievable, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. I turned to leave, but Connie stepped into the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Tom, she said softly, her eyes darting between me and Veronica. We came all this way. Don't walk away without getting what you need. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to turn back to Veronica. Why the note? I asked. Why not just, tell me? Her shoulders sagged as she leaned against the doorframe. Because I'm a coward, she said quietly. I thought it would be easier for you if I just disappeared. If you hated me instead of wondering why I stayed. Easier? I said, my voice cracking. You call this easier? The man cleared his throat, stepping forward again. Look, man, I didn't know the full story. I didn't know about you, or your kids. If I had. Don't, I growled, cutting him off. You don't get to play innocent here. You knew she was married. That should have been enough. He held up his hands defensively but said nothing. I turned back to Veronica, my chest tightening. This isn't over, I said, my voice low. You're coming back. Whether it's to fix this mess or to face what you've done, you owe us that much. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. No. Not here. Not now. I'll be in touch. The flight back home was eerily quiet. Connie sat beside me, staring out the window, while I replayed the confrontation with Veronica over and over in my head. Every word she said, every excuse she gave, burned into my mind. It felt like I had been hit by a freight train, and yet, I was still standing, somehow. You okay? Connie finally asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, though it was a lie. I'll be fine, I muttered. But in truth, I had no idea how to process everything that had happened. Veronica's betrayal was one thing, but her audacity to frame it as liberation was another. When we landed, the cold air of reality hit me like a slap. My sons would be waiting for answers. My co-workers would expect me to move on. And then there was Veronica's family, people who still believed she was missing, not playing house with some guy in a tropical paradise. Connie walked beside me through the terminal, her hand brushing against mine in silent solidarity. I did not know what I would have done without her. She had been my rock through all of this, even when I did not deserve her patience. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the weight of everything finally settling in. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every corner reminded me of the life we had built together, now nothing more than a hollow shell. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a text from Connie. "Just checking in. Call me if you need to talk." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Before I could respond, another notification popped up, a call from Veronica's number. My heart stopped. For a second, I thought it was some cruel joke. But the phone kept buzzing, and I finally answered, my voice shaky. "Hello. Tom." Veronica's voice came through, soft and hesitant. I didn't think you'd pick up. What do you want?" I asked, my tone cold. "Haven't you done enough?" "I needed to talk to you," she said. I owe you an explanation." I laughed bitterly. "You think? Maybe you should have thought about that before you disappeared." She sighed, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. "You're right. I handled everything wrong. I didn't know what else to do." "What else to do?" I snapped. "You could have talked to me, Veronica. You could have tried. But instead, you ran off and left me to clean up the mess." There was a long pause on the other end before she finally spoke. "I'm coming back." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. "I'm coming back. Coming back." I repeated, the bitterness dripping from my voice. "Back to what, Veronica? The life you torched before running off to play house with your little boyfriend?" "I deserve that," she admitted softly. "I know I do. But I want to fix this, Tom. I want to make things right." I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty room. "Make things right? Veronica, there's no fixing this. You don't just walk back into my life and expect everything to go back to normal." "I'm not expecting anything," she said quickly. I need to face what I've done. I need to explain to the boys, to everyone." I hesitated, her words catching me off guard. Was this guilt talking? Or was it another manipulation? "And Brandon? What about him?" I asked coldly. There was a pause, and then, "It's over. It's been over for weeks. He was never what I thought he was." "Good for you," I snapped. "But that doesn't change the damage you've done." "I know," she said quietly. "But I need to try. I owe you that much." I closed my eyes, the anger and exhaustion threatening to overwhelm me. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "Come back. But don't expect a warm welcome." The next few days passed in a haze. Connie came by to check on me, but I kept our conversations brief. I could tell she wanted to say something about Veronica's return, but she held back, and for that, I was grateful. I was already drowning in my own thoughts, I didn't need hers added to the mix. When the day finally came, I waited on the front porch, my arms crossed as I stared at the driveway. A taxi pulled up, and there she was, Veronica. She looked different. Tired. Smaller somehow. Her once perfect hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she carried only a single suitcase. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she stepped forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Hi, Tom." "Save it," I said, my voice cold. "You're not here for me. You're here for them." I gestured toward the house, where I knew our sons were waiting inside. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. "You're right." I stepped aside, letting her pass, but I didn't follow her in. Instead, I stayed on the porch, lighting a cigarette I didn't even want. Through the window, I could see her greeting the boys. They hugged her, their faces a mixture of relief and confusion. I felt a pang of jealousy, it was so easy for them to forgive her. But for me? Forgiveness felt like a distant, foreign concept. Later that evening, Veronica and I sat across from each other at the dining table, the boys having gone to bed. The silence between us was unbearable, but neither of us seemed willing to break it. Finally, she sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know you hate me," she said. "You're not wrong," I replied. Her lips trembled, but she held my gaze. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I need to tell you the truth. All of it." "Then start talking," I said, leaning back in my chair. She hesitated, then began. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Tom. I left because I stopped loving myself. Every day, I felt like I was losing more of who I was. The wife. The mother. The perfect partner. I didn't know how to be anything else." "So you found Brandon," I said flatly. "Yes," she admitted, her voice cracking. "And at first, it felt like an escape. Like I could breathe again. But it wasn't real. It was just another lie I told myself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to lash out, to yell, but instead, I just stared at her, my jaw clenched. "And now?" I asked. "What do you expect from me, Veronica? An apology won't erase what you did." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. To the boys. To everyone I hurt." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what she had shattered. But deep down, I knew it would never be the same. The next few weeks were a strange blur of tension and awkward silences. Veronica tried her best to slip back into the routines of our old life, helping with the boys, cooking dinner, even fixing up the garden she had always loved. But no matter how hard she tried, the cracks in our relationship were impossible to ignore. I avoided her as much as possible, pouring myself into work and spending more time with the boys. They seemed happy to have their mother back, and I could not bring myself to poison that for them. But every time I saw her smile at them, my chest tightened with resentment. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, Veronica found me in the garage. I was tinkering with the lawnmower, though it was more of an excuse to be alone than anything else. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I sighed, setting down the wrench and wiping my hands on a rag. "What now?" She stepped closer, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "I know things will never go back to the way they were. I am not stupid. But I need to know if there is even a chance for us, Tom." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "A chance for what? To pretend none of this happened? To act like I can trust you again?" "I am not asking for that," she said quickly. I need to know if you still care. If there's anything left to rebuild." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I looked away, staring at the wall as the silence stretched between us. "I do not know," I said finally. "Every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. What you destroyed. I do not know if I can ever get past that." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand. Do you?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Do you understand what it is like to question everything? To wonder if the life we built was ever real? Because that is what I live with every single day, Veronica." She flinched but held her ground. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, Tom. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. And I am willing to do whatever it takes to prove that." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Love? Is that what you call it? Because where I come from, love does not look like abandonment and betrayal." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "Enough. I cannot do this right now." The next day, Connie showed up unannounced. She breezed into the house, her expression set with determination. "You are going to sit down and talk to me," she said, dragging me into the kitchen. About what? I asked, irritated. About Veronica, she said bluntly. You are torturing yourself, Tom. You need to decide what you want, whether it is to move forward with her or move on without her. But this limbo you are stuck in. It is killing you. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. It is not that simple, Connie. Yes, it is, she shot back. Either you try to forgive her, or you let her go. But stringing this out is not fair to anyone, least of all yourself. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I slumped into a chair, running a hand through my hair. I do not know if I can forgive her, I admitted quietly. But I do not know if I am ready to let her go either. Then start there, Connie said, her voice softening. Figure out what you need, Tom. And do not let pride or anger get in the way. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so young, so happy. It felt like a lifetime ago, like those people were strangers now. Veronica walked in, stopping when she saw me. Tom, she said quietly, her voice uncertain. I gestured for her to sit, and she did, folding her hands nervously in her lap. I do not know where we go from here, I said. But for the boy's sake, I think we need to figure it out. Together. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I want that too. It was not forgiveness, not even close. But it was a start. The uneasy truce between Veronica and me lasted longer than I expected. We functioned like roommates more than partners, polite but distant, exchanging only the necessary words to keep the boys from noticing the tension. For their sake, I forced myself to tolerate her presence. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I found myself replaying everything she had done. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Veronica approached me cautiously. Can we talk? She asked, her voice soft. I glanced at her, wiping my hands on a dish towel. What now? I've been looking into therapy, she said. For us. I know things are broken, but I want to try to fix them. I stared at her, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. Therapy. Now. You think a couple of sessions will magically erase everything? She flinched but stood her ground. I do not expect it to be easy. I know it will take time. But if there is even a chance to save this, I have to try. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. What about Brandon? Did he suggest therapy before or after you wrecked our marriage? Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might walk away. But instead, she took a deep breath, meeting my gaze. I deserve that. But this is not about him, Tom. This is about us. Us? I scoffed. There hasn't been an us since you walked out that door, Veronica. Maybe not, she admitted. But I'm here now. And I'm not giving up, even if you want to. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I wanted to shut her down, to tell her it was too late. But a small, stubborn part of me, one I hated to acknowledge, wondered if she was right. Could we ever fix this? A week later, we found ourselves sitting in a small office, across from a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. Her name was Dr. Lyman, and she had the calm, measured tone of someone who had seen it all before. Why are you here today? She asked, looking between us. Veronica glanced at me nervously before speaking. Because I broke our marriage, and I do not know how to fix it. Dr. Lyman nodded, her pen scratching across the page. And you, Tom? Why are you here? I hesitated, unsure how to put my tangled mess of emotions into words. Because I don't know if I can forgive her, I said finally. But I don't want to keep living like this. The session was brutal. Dr. Lyman pressed us on everything, our past, our mistakes, our fears. Veronica admitted things I had never expected to hear, things that cut deeper than I thought possible. I found myself saying things I had buried for years, resentments I did not even know I had. By the time we left, I felt like I had been through a war. But as much as I hated to admit it, something about the session felt necessary. Over the next few months, therapy became a routine. Some sessions ended in shouting matches, others in tears. But little by little, the walls between us began to crack. Veronica started volunteering information instead of waiting for me to ask. I found myself listening instead of immediately lashing out. It was not perfect, but it was progress. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Veronica sat beside me on the couch. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I need to tell you something," she said. I braced myself, my chest tightening. "What now?" "It's about Brandon," she said quietly. "When I ended things with him, he didn't take it well. He showed up at the resort, demanding to talk to me. It got ugly, and I had to call security to get him to leave." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to know everything," she said. "No more secrets, no more lies." Her honesty caught me off guard. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with. But could I ever trust her again? The first crack in our fragile truce came during dinner one night. It was a rare moment when all four of us sat together, the boys animatedly talking about school. For a brief second, it almost felt normal, until my youngest, Ethan, asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Mom," he said innocently, twirling spaghetti on his fork, "why did you go away so long? Was it because of us?" The room fell silent. Veronica's fork clattered onto her plate, her face draining of color. I froze, unsure of how to respond. "No, honey," she said finally, her voice trembling. "It wasn't because of you. It was complicated." Ethan frowned. "But you didn't tell us. I thought maybe we did something wrong." "You didn't," I said quickly, my voice firmer than I intended. "This wasn't about you, Ethan. It was an adult thing." "Yeah, an adult thing," my older son, Mason, muttered. He had been quiet all dinner, pushing food around his plate. Now, his gaze locked onto Veronica, sharp and accusing. "You mean like leaving Dad and running off with some guy?" Veronica flinched like he had slapped her. "Mason, that's not." "Don't lie to me," he interrupted, his voice rising. "I heard you and Aunt Connie talking the other day. You think I don't know? You think I don't get what you did?" Ethan's eyes widened, looking back and forth between us. "What's he talking about?" "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Ethan, go upstairs." "But," he started, his lip trembling. "Now," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan bolted from the table, tears streaming down his face. Mason shoved his chair back, storming off to his room without another word. Veronica sat frozen, her hands trembling as she stared at her plate. "I told you this would happen," I said, my voice low but filled with anger. "You didn't just betray me, Veronica. You broke them too." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I know," she whispered. "I know I did." Later that night, I found Mason in his room, sitting on his bed with his arms crossed. His jaw was set, his expression cold. "You're mad," I said, sitting down beside him. He shrugged. "I'm not mad. I'm done." "Done?" I asked, confused. "With her," he said, his voice hard. "She doesn't care about us, Dad. She never did." "That's not true," I said, though the words felt hollow. "She made mistakes. Big ones. But she loves you." "Then why did she leave?" he shot back, his eyes filling with tears. "If she loved us, why did she leave?" I had no answer. Instead, I pulled him into a hug, his small frame shaking as he finally broke down. In that moment, I realized just how deep the damage ran. It wasn't just me who had to pick up the pieces. It was all of us. The next day, as I was getting ready for work, Connie showed up unannounced. She stormed into the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," she said, slamming her purse onto the counter. "About what?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Bren called me," she said flatly. My stomach twisted. "Bren? As in Brandon?" She nodded, crossing her arms. "He said he needs to talk to Veronica. Apparently, he's got unfinished business." "Unfinished business?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "What the hell does that mean?" "I don't know," Connie said. "But he sounded off. Like he's not taking no for an answer." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. After everything he had already done, the thought of him inserting himself into our lives again made my blood boil. He's not talking to her. Not now, not ever. "Tom, be careful," Connie said, her voice softer now. "The last thing you need is him stirring up more trouble." "Let him try," I said, my jaw tightening. "I'm done letting him control this." Brandon's sudden reappearance in our lives was like a match thrown onto a pile of dry kindling. For days, I waited for him to make his move, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. I did not tell Veronica. She had enough to deal with, and frankly, I did not trust how she might handle it. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he crossed the line. The opportunity came one evening when I was picking up groceries. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced at the screen to see a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Face to face. You owe me that much." I clenched my jaw, immediately recognizing the tone. It was him. Brandon. My hands tightened around the shopping cart handle as I debated my next move. I could ignore him, but something told me he would not go away quietly. With a deep breath, I typed back. "Fine. Name the place." Later that night, I found myself sitting in the corner of a dimly lit bar, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the air. Brandon walked in like he owned the place, his crisp button-up shirt standing out against the dingy backdrop. He spotted me instantly, his expression unreadable. "You actually showed up," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I figured it was better than letting you harass Connie or Veronica," I replied coldly. "What do you want, Brandon?" He leaned back, studying me with a smug smile. "What do I want? Funny. I could ask you the same thing." I frowned, my patience already wearing thin. "You texted me. So cut the games and get to the point." His smile faltered slightly, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, maybe? "Look, I made mistakes, okay? I thought what Veronica and I had was real. I thought she was unhappy with you. But when she ended things, I realized. I was just the escape." "Wow," I said, clapping sarcastically. "Thanks for the self-awareness, Brandon. What do you want? Closure? Forgiveness? Because you're not getting it from me." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I'm not here for that. I just want to make sure she's okay. I care about her, Tom. I always have." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You care about her? That's rich. You cared so much you helped her destroy her family." "I didn't force her to do anything," he snapped, his voice rising. "She came to me, Tom. She made her choices." "Yeah, well, now she's living with the consequences," I said, standing up. "And so are you. Stay the hell away from her. From all of us." As I turned to leave, Brandon grabbed my arm. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Tom," he said, his voice quieter now. "Just, tell her I'm sorry. For everything. I yanked my arm free, glaring at him. Tell her yourself. Oh wait, you can't. Because she doesn't want anything to do with you. I walked out of the bar, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me. For a moment, I wondered if Brandon really was sorry. But then I remembered the pain in Mason's voice, the tears in Ethan's eyes, and the look on Veronica's face when she admitted the truth. Sorry was not enough. When I got home, Veronica was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up as I walked in, her brow furrowing. Where were you? Out, I said shortly, tossing my keys onto the table. Out where? She pressed, standing up. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I met Brandon. Her face paled. What? Why? Because he wouldn't leave it alone, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He wanted to talk. Said he needed closure. And, what did you say? She asked hesitantly. I told him to stay the hell away from us, I said firmly. But he wanted me to pass along a message. He's sorry. For everything. Veronica looked away, her arms wrapping around herself. I don't need his apology. Good, I said, my tone cold. Because neither do I. The days following my meeting with Brandon were heavy with unspoken tension. Veronica avoided me, her silence louder than any argument we could have had. Part of me was relieved, I needed space to process everything. But another part of me was furious. She was the one who had created this mess, yet I was the one constantly cleaning it up. One evening, Mason came into the living room, his face set in that hard, defiant expression he had perfected since Veronica's return. Dad, he said, crossing his arms, can I ask you something? Sure, I said, gesturing for him to sit. He did not. Why are you letting her stay here? She doesn't deserve it. His words hit me harder than I expected. It's complicated, Mason, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She's your mom, Anne. She left us, he snapped, cutting me off. She lied, she cheated, and now she thinks she can just walk back into our lives like nothing happened. That's not what she's doing, I said, though I was not entirely sure I believed it myself. She's trying to make things right. Right? Mason scoffed. There's no making this right. She broke us, Dad. You can't fix something that's already shattered. I stared at him, my heart aching for the anger and pain etched on his young face. Mason, I said softly, I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm not even sure I can. But we have to figure out a way to live with what happened. For your brother. For ourselves. He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't want to live with it, he said, his voice breaking. I just want things to go back to the way they were. I reached out to him, but he pulled away, storming out of the room. I sat there for a long time, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a stone. That night, Veronica knocked on my bedroom door. Can I come in? She asked hesitantly. I sighed, sitting up in bed. What do you want, Veronica? She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Mason hates me, she said, her voice trembling. And I don't blame him. He's angry, I said simply. And he has every right to be. She nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. I don't know how to fix this, Tom. Every time I try to talk to him, he shuts me out. I feel like I've already lost him. You might have, I said bluntly. And that's something you'll have to live with. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked completely defeated. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? I don't know, I admitted. But if you want even a chance, you need to stop running away every time things get hard. You need to face what you did, Veronica. All of it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm trying, Tom. I really am. But every time I look at him, I see how much I've hurt him. And it kills me. Good, I said, my voice cold. Because it should. She flinched but did not argue. Instead, she stood and headed for the door. Before she left, she turned back to me. Thank you, she said quietly. For being honest. I did not respond. Instead, I lay back down, staring at the ceiling long after she had gone. The next morning, Veronica tried to break the ice with Mason at breakfast. It was awkward, to say the least. She set his plate in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. Pancakes, she said softly. Your favorite. He glanced at her but said nothing. Instead, he stabbed at his food with his fork, chewing in silence. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, chattered about a school project, but the rest of us sat in a heavy quiet. After Ethan ran off to pack his backpack, Mason finally spoke. You can't bribe me with pancakes, Mom. Veronica flinched, but to her credit, she stood her ground. I'm not trying to bribe you, she said. I want us to have one normal breakfast. He snorted, shaking his head. Normal? You think this is normal? You think you can walk in here, make breakfast, and everything will be fine? I don't think that, she said quickly. I just want us to try. Well, I'm not trying, he snapped, pushing his plate away. You're not my mom. Not anymore. I froze, watching the words hit her like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, but she bit her lip, holding back the tears threatening to spill. Mason stood, grabbing his backpack and storming out the door without another word. Veronica sank into the chair he had just vacated, her head in her hands. He's never going to forgive me, she whispered. I sighed, sitting across from her. He might not. But giving up won't help. I don't know how to keep fighting for someone who doesn't want me in their life, she said, her voice cracking. You keep fighting because you're his mother, I said firmly. And whether he admits it or not, he needs you. They both do. She looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. Thank you, Tom. For not giving up on them, even when I did. Later that day, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed with a text from Connie. We need to talk. Now. I called her immediately, her tone clipped as she answered. Tom, he's back. Brandon. He showed up at my office this morning. What the hell does he want? I asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He said he needs to talk to Veronica, she said. Said it's important. My blood boiled. I told him to stay away. I know, Connie said. But he's not letting this go. He said if Veronica doesn't call him back, he's going to show up at your house. Let him try, I growled. I'll deal with him. Tom, she said, her voice tinged with worry. Just be careful. Something about him seemed off. Like he's desperate. That evening, I told Veronica about Brandon. Her face went pale, and she immediately began shaking her head. No. No way. I'm not talking to him. Good, I said. Because he's not coming near this family again. Tom, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Brandon, he's not who you think he is. When I ended things, he got angry. He started showing up at the resort, leaving messages, calling me non-stop. I had to block him. Why didn't you tell me this before? I demanded. Because I didn't want to drag you into it, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I thought if I just ignored him, he'd go away. Well, he hasn't, I said sharply. And now he's making threats. If he shows up here, Veronica, I'm not letting him walk away unscathed. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Tom, promise me you won't do anything stupid. Please. I looked at her, my jaw tight. I'll protect this family, Veronica. Whatever it takes. The next few days felt like living on the edge of a knife. Every time the doorbell rang or a car slowed down near the house, my muscles tensed, waiting for Brandon to show up. I had no doubt he would eventually. Men like him never let things go. Veronica kept to herself, spending most of her time trying to connect with Mason. But every attempt seemed to backfire. He barely spoke to her, his silence sharper than any words he could have said. Ethan, thankfully, was still too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, though his innocent questions about why Mason was so mad all the time broke my heart. One evening, as I was finishing up work in the garage, Connie called again. Her voice was low, urgent. "Tom, he's in town. I saw him outside my building this morning." I clenched my jaw. "Did he say anything to you?" "No," she said. "But he was watching me. I think he's trying to figure out where Veronica is." My grip tightened on the wrench in my hand. "He won't get anywhere near her. Just, be careful," she said. "This guy is unhinged. I don't trust him." Later that night, as the boys were getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. My heart dropped. Veronica appeared in the hallway, her face pale. "Do you think it's—" "Stay with the boys," I said firmly, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by the door. My pulse thundered in my ears as I opened it, bracing for the worst. Sure enough, there he was. Brandon. His once polished appearance was gone, his shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes bloodshot. He looked desperate, almost manic. "What the hell are you doing here?" I growled, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. "I need to see her," he said, his voice shaking. "Tom, please. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." 5 minutes? I barked a bitter laugh. "You're lucky I don't knock you out right here." "Tom, he took a step closer, but I raised the bat, and he froze. "Don't," I warned. "You've already caused enough damage. You're not getting near her. Ever. She needs to hear me out," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. You don't get to play the victim," I snapped, cutting him off. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Brandon. Now get the hell out of here before I call the cops." He hesitated, his eyes darting to the house behind me. "Tom, please. Just tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I leave." I roared, taking a step forward. The bat was still in my hand, and I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. He backed away slowly, his hands raised. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. I'm going." I watched as he retreated to his car, his shoulders slumped. When he finally drove off, I stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. When I went back inside, Veronica was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Was it him?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, setting the bat down. "But he's gone. He won't bother us again." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Tom. For protecting us." I wanted to say something, to tell her how furious I still was, how broken we all were because of her choices. But instead, I just nodded and walked past her, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a stone. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. The boys were still asleep, and Veronica sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. Her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed red, and for the first time in weeks, she looked completely fragile. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of last night still hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Is he really gone?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I said. "But if he shows up again, I'll make sure he understands he's not welcome here." She nodded, wrapping her hands around the mug. I'm sorry, Tom. For everything. For him. For all of it. Sorry doesn't fix this, Veronica, I said, my voice sharp but tired. You can't just say, sorry, and expect it all to go away. I know, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But I don't know what else to say. Then stop saying anything and start doing something, I said, leaning forward. Mason's barely speaking to you, Ethan's confused, and I don't even know what I am anymore. She flinched at my words but nodded. I'll try harder. I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her, but after everything, words felt hollow. Actions were the only thing that mattered now. That afternoon, Mason came home from soccer practice, slamming the door harder than necessary. He dropped his bag by the stairs and stormed into the kitchen, where Veronica was preparing dinner. Hey, Mason, she said softly, glancing up from the cutting board. Hey, he muttered, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. For a moment, it seemed like he might just walk away, but then he stopped, turning to face her. Why didn't you fight for us? Veronica froze, the knife trembling in her hand. Mason, You left, he said, his voice cracking. You just left. And now you're here, acting like everything's fine, like you didn't wreck everything. I know I hurt you, she said, setting the knife down and turning to face him. And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I came back because I want to fix it. I want to fix us. You can't fix it, he snapped, tears streaming down his face. You can't take back what you did. You're right, she said, her voice trembling. I can't take it back. But I can try to make things better. Please, Mason. Let me try. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. Veronica sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I watched from the doorway, my chest tight. Mason's anger was justified, but seeing it play out like this was like watching an open wound bleed. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, I found Veronica sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of sadness and hope. I was looking at our wedding photos, she said, holding up a picture of us dancing. We looked so happy. We were happy, I said, sitting down across from her. Until you decided it wasn't enough. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I know I destroyed what we had. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm still here, Tom. I'm still trying. I know, I said quietly. But it's not just about me. It's about Mason and Ethan. They need to heal, too. How? She asked, her voice breaking. How do I fix what I broke? You start by not giving up, I said. No matter how hard it gets. You keep trying, Veronica. For them. For all of us. The following weeks were a slow, painful grind. Veronica kept trying, every day, she tried. She cooked their favorite meals, showed up at Mason's soccer games, helped Ethan with his school projects. But Mason's anger remained a wall she could not break through. Ethan, at least, seemed to come around, but the house still felt fractured. One evening, as I was locking up for the night, Mason came into the living room. His face was set in that familiar hard expression, but there was something different in his eyes, something softer. Dad, he said hesitantly. Can I talk to you? Of course, I said, motioning for him to sit. He hesitated, shifting his weight before finally sitting down. Do you think she really cares? Or is she just pretending? I exhaled, the weight of the question settling over me. I think she cares, Mason. I think she made terrible mistakes, and I think she'll spend the rest of her life trying to make up for them. He stared at the floor, his fists clenched. I want to forgive her, he admitted. But every time I look at her, I just get so angry. That's okay, I said gently. You're allowed to be angry. But holding on to it forever will only hurt you more. He nodded slowly, tears slipping down his cheeks. I miss her, he whispered. I pulled him into a hug, his small frame trembling. I know, buddy. I miss her too. The next morning, Mason surprised us all by sitting down at the breakfast table and actually talking to Veronica. It was not much, just a few comments about his game that weekend, but it was enough to make her eyes light up. I saw a flicker of hope in her expression, a spark of something I had not seen in a long time. It was a small step, but it was a step. Months turned into a year. Brandon was gone for good, and the wounds he had left were finally beginning to heal. Mason still had his moments of anger, and I still struggled with trust, but our family was starting to feel whole again. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, laughing at one of Ethan's stories, I glanced at Veronica. She was smiling, not the forced, desperate smile she had worn when she first returned, but a real, genuine smile. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. We were not perfect. We never would be. But we were still here, still fighting, still trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.